Okay, I think it's recorded. Let's see. Okay, great. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Hawaii Aquaculture Tech and Research Brown Bag, sponsored by NELHA and the Hawaii Aquaculture Collaborative, which is facilitated by UH Grant College Program. I'm Jean Schneider, representing the Sea Grant team, and Ray Nguyen is our co-host and partner at NELHA. Today, we will be hearing from the Hawaii Department of Agriculture on their aquaculture strategic plan. A couple of items before we do that, incidentally, NELHA is just meeting on Zoom today and not in the Haleakala conference room. So if you're headed that way, go back to your office, please. Sorry about that. Let's see. The recording and slides of today's session will be archived on the actions page of our website, hiaquacollab.org, where you will find previous sessions and many other resources. There are a number of exciting upcoming aquaculture activities to participate in. So on March 13th, presented by our friends at PACRAC, Development of Production Technologies for Marine Fish. March 14th, a YouTube watch party, Raising Pua, Raising Community. March 25th is the deadline to apply for AquaHack, an aquaculture innovation ideation workshop sponsored by Hatch and the Clear Aim Project. On March 22nd, another PACRAC workshop, One Fish, Two Fish, How Culturing Fish Can Help Conserve Our Coral Reefs. And next month's Tech and Research Brown Bag is on April 10th and will feature Ame Masutomi from Ecoponics, discussing their research to use local food waste as an input to local feed. Another workshop in the PACRAC series on April 10th, Can Hatchery Production of Mullet Help Revitalize Hawaiian Fish Ponds? And there is a Senate bill alive on this topic. I believe it was heard today, and it has been receiving tremendous support. So thank you for submitting your testimony if you were able to do that, and please continue to do that in the future. And finally, April 18th is the AquaHack event at NELHA. It is an all-day event. So please go to our website for links and more info. Okay, and now let's get down to our main event. We are excited to welcome the Department of Agriculture to discuss their aquaculture strategic plan. The links to the plan were provided in today's meeting invitation, and we will also put the links in the chat. We want to welcome Chair Sharon Hurd and Todd Lowe, manager of the Aquaculture Development Program. Chair Hurd, I'm not sure if you made it on, but thank you for supporting this presentation. We know Todd is going to go through the plan, but wanted to provide some space for Chair Hurd in case she had any remarks. So welcome to you both, and DOA, you can take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jean. Hi, everyone. This is Todd Lowe. I work for Department of Agriculture. I will attempt to share my screen right now. Okay, do you see a blue screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so this is, as I started to put this PowerPoint together, it wasn't, I could talk just about our plan or the revised plan that we did, but it made more sense at least to start off with how we got there and the different pieces that are in play as we move forward. So, oops. There's 6 pieces that I'm just going to go over real quick here. And one of them is the plan. But you see that this stuff has started in 2021 with the NOAA release of AOA atlases for the Gulf of Mexico and California. We released our own Hawaii's Ocean Opportunity Report in 22. 23, Hatch and World Bank did the Global Seaweed New and Emerging Markets Report. We did a Senate Impro briefing. The plan itself was finally polished and came out on Feb 1, 2024. And strangely, a new strategic plan came out at the Fed level. So these all add up to our momentum moving forward, and let's just go through them real quick. Okay, so this is just showing the number one. Okay, so what NOAA did, they are tasked to develop aquaculture opportunity areas. And they released 2 of these atlases. And what they did is they combined at least 200 data layers. You can read this for environmental, economic, social, and cultural considerations, including fishing interests in marine protected areas. This is actually a big deal because what they've done is gotten into the spatial mapping of aquaculture. And again, it's about Gulf of Mexico and California, but it was all driven by an executive order in 2020 by the presidential executive order. And so within a year, you can see this, they had to do 2 geographic areas, which they did. Now they're working on programmatic EISs. I assume so. I'm not really close to the inner workings, but the last bullet point is relevant to us. So they are going to be looking for 2 additional AOAs, or aquaculture opportunity areas, and those are for sustainable commercial aquaculture industry development, okay? And they haven't defined them yet. So this is something we will get back to, but this is the first milestone in what I consider more federal alignment with aquaculture industry development. Okay, the next one, the Hawaii Oceans Opportunity Report. This is something that we did with Hatch, and it really introduced the idea or the concept, at least for in the Hawaii perspective, for restorative aquaculture. And as an opportunity for us to move forward. So in that report, they talked about a bunch of things, but the real takeaway for me was the values of restorative aquaculture. And you can see them here. These are just sustainability metrics, right? We all know about that, environmental, social, and economic. So the idea is to plant the seed that restorative aquaculture is not just environmental. We lead with environmental, but there's also immense social and economic sustainability portions to it, okay? Excuse me. Okay, the third slide. The third milestone is the Global Seaweed Report for the World Bank. And here, it was done by Hatch. Hatch comes up a lot in our stuff, but they've been all over the world and they bring a global perspective of things. So they did this work for World Bank, and we're talking now at the global level. And they looked at seaweed's new and emerging markets. So I will throw up this slide. For everyone's edification, this is what they came up with. And these are in billions, right? And what I want you to look at on the top is the time frames are not that far out, right? We are in 2024 right now. And so you see on the left side, these different areas where seaweed can have an impact. And they, of course, tried to estimate in dollar amounts. So for us in Hawaii at NELHA, we're already looking at the methane reducing additive in feeds and that size of the market, but you can see other areas are enormous. And collectively, it is a rounding up a $12 billion market, at least as they saw back in 2023, in the next 5 years, a huge economic opportunity for seaweed. So let's connect that dot back to the Hawaii's Ocean Opportunities Report, saying that restorative aquaculture is a huge opportunity for Hawaii. We're now looking at the economic values that could possibly come into play. But what's missing here, these are new and emerging markets. What's missing is algae as a biofuel. And I just Googled it, so I'm not owning or trying to push the Straits research. There's different research people out there, but they took a look at global algae biofuel market. And of course, we haven't gotten there yet, but the reason I'm bringing this up is, again, these are opportunities that are possibilities for, let's say, our indigenous algae. So the market size is 7 billion in 2021, looking at 15 billion in 2030. So that's 8.7 compound annual growth rate. And here's a handy chart that shows the slope of the growth. So if you were to, the takeaways from this little section here is that between biofuel and other uses of seaweed, we are looking at, this is 16, the other one was 12, so $28 billion of a global market size. I get it, and we have to do a lot of work to get there. But if we're looking at areas where Hawaii has immense potential, this would be one of them, I think. And it's basically sky's the limit, depending on what we can do on the production side, et cetera, et cetera. I know there are a lot of steps between there, but if you were looking from a pure business play on what's possible, you would want to focus on areas where you have a lot of room to grow. Okay. Okay, so let's get to the fourth milestone, which is the Senate Water and Land hearing, which was on January in 2024 this year. And the significance of this is that I just said it, the growth, a potential growth at $600 million locally by 2034. And I think I was very conservative because if things work out, who knows where we could get to. Again, looking back at the seaweed potential, at least in the ecosystem service potential, right? As we looked at in the previous slides. So I don't know how many people have seen this. The only place I showed it was at that meeting. So for all of the industry people here, you can see what I thought would happen. And the challenge, of course, as many of you guys know, that within our statistics, we are limited by what USDA, how they count it and how they bunch it. So the existing categories are what the USDA NAS counts is in terms of their statistics for many things, but for this one, it's for aquaculture in Hawaii. So all I have is algae, ornamental, and others. In others is a catch-all. That's the big pieces are the finfish and SPF shrimp, and anything other than, ornamental and algae. So it is kind of it's a, plate luncheon. It's a mixed plate. So you see in 2022, in the middle of the page, we are at about 90 million. Yeah. Now, I'm looking at 2034, and at least in these categories, these are the numbers I'll show. And what you'll see in the next slide, I'll show you how I broke it down. But let's say in the existing categories, I'm going to get up to 520. The new categories would be aquaponics. Now, aquaponics is interesting because right now on a national level, there are, nobody breaks out aquaponics because it's not big enough for USDA to separate, but I'm just assuming that we're gonna get there and we can separate it out. Well, that's a fudge. Also, value-added products is an estimate based on a percentage I came up with looking at the industry to show, because what we see here on the existing categories on the top, that's typically farm gate value, right? And those are pretty much raw materials. And then conservation is highlighted, and that's our ecosystem services. So you look at the bottom, I get to 597. it's sort of like pricing something in the grocery store, right? It's just enough that it seems reasonable, but as we move forward, I think we can blow past this. One of the reasons is I think 40 million is very conservative for ecosystem services and seaweed value added stuff, looking back at those previous slides, right?
Todd, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think Wendy Gady had a question. You want to ask your
Okay.
question, Wendy, real quick?
I would, let's see if I even have this.
Hi, Wendy.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if you could elaborate on what exactly is in the big buckets of the new category value add and conservation. What
Yeah.
is,
I'm gonna, not in so much conservation, but I'm gonna get to how I figured out existing categories without showing actual companies. But maybe if we get through this and you have more questions after that, at this
Fine.
section, okay? Okay, so I talked to some different companies, and I don't want to show their company names and how much they're projecting to grow, because that's not what we're doing here. But basically, there's a difference between, of course, macroalgae and microalgae. Our friends at Cyanotech are microalgae, and the other guys, like the methane people, Heidi Kloonley at Kloonley AgriFutures is macroalgae because they're growing seaweed. This is what we think is going to be happening by 2034. If you wanted more information, you probably could talk to them directly. In the other forecasts, we took our best guess, talking to the industry, talking to some extension people, talking to the companies, and we're looking at total value in 2034, which comes out to 124 million. Again, you could dig into each of these things, and what I have is another sheet that we really break down to how we got to these numbers. But I could talk to some, if you had a specific question on that, I can talk to you later on it, because it's really going to be specific on how we estimated it. In here, shrimp is shrimp for food. Neil Sims, that's not hard to hide. Also, their plans for Moy. Kampachi, of course, is our Kampachi guys. Catfish, we talked to Dr. Kai Fox and possible size of an industry. And abalone is the big island abalone guys. So that's that. And so when we talk about that $40 million for the seaweed, this is really the areas that I think that we would be able to start to put values against. It's the value of carbon sequestration, ecosystem restoration, and water quality improvement. I will tell you that today, there's not the ability to put a dollar value against them. But the movement globally is to do so. And that will legitimize the restorative aquaculture side of things. I know many of the people on this call and the usual guys that are in aquaculture think we may be abandoning, food for fish or fish for food, and the traditional, quote unquote, traditional aquaculture sector, and that's not true. What we're trying to do here is to look for ways that we can grow the industry that will help everybody move this forward. So if you were to go back to look at how things are defined for sustainability, there is environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and economics, right? Social license is going to be huge for this industry to move forward. And the ability to show upfront that aquaculture is a positive action for conservation and ecosystem services, which is what these three are, and there's more, is going to be able to lead into a new area where we can also, behind the scenes, it's all about good aquaculture practices, hatcheries, et cetera, that we can lift everybody up coming back through. So the pressure on trying to grow agriculture in this case, or aquaculture for food, is immense. And it's hard because look at the Department of Ag in general that's their task of doubling food production by 2034 or whatever that number is. We fit into that number. And today I would have to say there's no really definitive plan. But if we can move ourselves into a new area, I think this is a possibility that we can grow the industry. And also, as we just looked at these other slides, we're going to grow, sorry, I'm going backwards. We're going to go quite a bit anyway, I think. A big piece of that is going to be, blue ocean mariculture by itself. They're starting to ramp up, et cetera, et cetera. So these are starting to move forward. So I believe this is conservative. Whether we can get to $1 billion, who knows? But we can sure try. So after spewing a bunch of stuff, really the thing was that $600 million number seems to want to stick around, which is fine, because that gives everybody sort of the North Star, and that's where everybody can fit under. So then what happened next? Well, we come out with this thing called Improving the Aquaculture Development Plan. And my goal was to create something that at least we would be globally competitive. And I really wanted to integrate aquaculture, restorative aquaculture with the existing priorities, right? You can read that, blah, blah, blah. This is a heavy slide, and I apologize for it, but there's no other way to get around it. This was the task that I put for Hatch. And there's a lot of stuff in here, and I think they did a pretty good job. I'm not going to go through actually the different chapters of the plan because you guys can read it. What we really wanted to do, take the one on the bottom, examples of successful partnerships or best practices. They did that. You can see in the plan, there's a bunch of different areas, and because each one is different. Each program out there in globally is localized for their current area. So what can we learn from there? This gives us some hints. We'll go into a little bit about the tactical steps, but again, this is really, aquaculture development is not that hard to understand. It's hard to do. And what we wanted to do was really put some meat on the existing plan so that it stands up to other development plans globally. And the only people that could do that would have that view of being out there and seeing the other plans. So again, let's see. Well, we can get into it, but this has been a continuum, right? It's been a series of events that are leading up to kind of coalescing around a certain area, at least for me. And we can talk about that later. If everybody has different missions and parameters and limitations in their organizations and what they do, this is DOA's plan. And I want to make that clear. By no means is this has to be your plan, or what you guys do with it is up to you. But this is the areas that we're moving forward. So anyway, so in this plan, they broke it down into 4 basic areas. And again, this is nothing new to the guys that are in the industry, right? Regulatory development, because regulations are tough. Applied research, workforce development, and economic viability. I will throw in that workforce development is a key component to how we move forward. However, that's not something that the Department of Agriculture actually has historically focused on. And because in the state, we have people like Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, we have people like the University of Hawaii and the whole education framework. I'm talking to the DOE and talking to community colleges and 4-year colleges. So standing back, you'd say, yeah, we need more workforce, but you could say that for almost everything that's happening right now. But they threw that in there, and I think that's valid because what they were trying to do is, Hatch was trying to identify areas that we need to get better on. And they did. Okay, so let's just go through those 4 areas fairly quickly. Right, simplify and consolidate regulatory processes and regulation and pathways to permits. No question, this is something we've been talking about forever, right? Some things we can do, some things we can't touch because they're federally mandated or they're controlled by the feds. But, and I would, these 4 things that are underneath this thing. Next slide. So this is not a surprise. Good. Another thing, applied research and entrepreneurial stuff. So entrepreneurship in this case means commercialization. So how do you get applied research and get it out into the industry so it can be adopted and become commercially viable? So dynamic innovation ecosystem to build a pipeline, applied commercial solutions for more modern aquaculture, right? And that's something that Hatch is doing already. If they're incubators and they're accelerators. And I believe that's something that's going to be folded into the Clear Aim project, but we'll have to see how that works out. But anyways, this is a piece that Hatch is already doing. So, and underneath you can see just different areas of where we could start to move ahead with research and commercialization. I talked about this a few minutes ago. Yes, workforce development is important. How the Department of Agriculture grapples, or the state grapples with this subject, is a big one. We are looking on the biggest scale, trying to get more people into our workforce in state job positions in general, because we all have these huge vacancy lists. But also definitely for aquaculture to get us to 600 million or $1 billion or whatever we're going to say that our target is, then that is we'll need more workforce. So these things can be built in conjunction with how the industry is starting to grow. So and economic growth. So this whole thing about public-private partnerships has been tossed around for many years in the States. And it really remains to be seen how it's working out. I think one of them they were pointing at was the public-private partnership that is around the proposed stadium right near us in Halava. That is a work in progress. So how we do things here, I think we have to get more creative. Me and DOA has to get more creative in how we partner up with different places and people so that we can leverage their efforts and move forward. So there's a lot in here. There's a blue carbon market ideas. There's access to capital, innovation cluster programs. The guys at Hatch have seen different things that work globally. Whether or not we can pull them off locally, it's many of that. We have some political constraints, etc. So but we will focus on this and keep on moving. Hold on one second. Okay, so the last piece wasn't really planned, but it popped out right after the ADP plan came out. And our friends in the feds came up with a strategic plan for aquaculture economic development from the National Science and Technology Council. And you're like, okay, who are these guys, right? And again, I won't read it to you, but this is from a global perspective. They are starting to look at supporting a globally competitive, environmentally sustainable domestic aquaculture sector. What is actually interesting is that this is part of 5 pieces in an aquaculture plan for the feds. Maybe the first one is an overview, and that's an introduction, so that doesn't count so much. So maybe there's 4. So there's economic development, aquaculture research, regulatory efficiency, and the 4th, or the last one, is this thing called the Guide to Federal Aquaculture Programs and Services. So all you on the call will say, well, so what, right? These are the feds, they're at the 60,000 foot level. And who knows, we've not heard of these guys or what they do. And you are right. Because look who's in this NSTC. This is kind of small, but it's a who's who of the people that are touching agriculture, but also aquaculture, including the White House for the budget, State Department, of course, USDA, Army Corps, DOC, which where NOAA sits, Food and Drug, US Fish and Wildlife, etc., EPA, NASA even, not sure what they're doing there, but they are participating. So what that tells me is that this group and the feds can move at whatever speed they move. And of course, if you're paying attention to the newspapers, they seem to run out of money every other month. So they keep kicking that can. How effective this is going to be is really going to be interesting, but there is a framework. Also, as we all know, there's a presidential election coming. And so all sorts of things are moving around in the Fed level. But what these guys did was they polished up their goals. And it was interesting because the leading sentence in this thing was the first time in 40 years. So they've been around for 40 years, but they haven't revised their plan for 40 years. So weirdly, it comes out a couple of days after we do our little plan. So what does that mean? These are just big, high-level goals, but we'll get to why it's important. Right, encourage industry investment, support infrastructure and workforce development, these words you've heard before, expand market opportunities for US aquaculture products, and then, let's say, increase aquaculture engagement. I'm not sure what literacy is, but it doesn't matter too much. And so, this is it, it's alignment. What we want to do is align ourselves, whether we're going for grants, whether we're trying to get congressionally delegated funding, whether we're working on whatever pieces that touch us that the feds are doing that we can say we're aligned with this plan. And I believe that will help the momentum going forward. So our congressional delegation should know about it, and they do. All the other aquaculture bills floating through the Congress really are sort of tied to developing the industry, and this NSTC plan gives it a framework. Okay, so what I did here, just real quick, and in red, I said these are the things that we are definitely trying to align with. So regulatory efficiency, access to capital, and data analysis, right? This is under industry investment. Workforce development, all of them, right? Educate a skilled, diverse aquaculture workforce, new technologies, investment in physical infrastructure, test beds, R&D consortiums, and pilots. Yes, yes, yes. This is the stuff that we want to do here, and the feds are in alignment. Market opportunities, we don't necessarily promote things on a global competitiveness, but we evaluate, and if our products do meet their criteria, there's a place for them to live at the Fed level, and of course, new product development. And community engagement. Okay. So that's the end of that sort of a little timeline journey about how we got to where we are and all the different pieces that are part of this thing. Do you want to take questions now, Jean, or should I just keep going? Or what do you want to do? Because the next piece that I'm going to talk about is what we're actually doing and what we're planning on doing. And I'm not sure if people want to talk about that or more about the strategy that went into this plan. I'll leave it up to you.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, I do think that people are interested in ADP's strategy for sure, but let's check in. Does anyone have, maybe we can entertain one question. Does anyone have a question? Please raise your hand or just go ahead and unmute.
Oh, my friend Tori out there, who is from NOAA, Tori Spence, she is the NOAA aquaculture coordinator. She threw in something in the chat about what literacy is. So actually thank you, Tori. All
right, thanks. Tori responded that literacy would be making sure there's more accurate messaging around aquaculture so people know what it is, how it can support local economies, restoration, etc. Yes, mahalo, Tori. Yeah, so hearing no questions, let's forge ahead. Thanks, Todd.
Right, and then Jenica threw in that,
Uh-oh.
thanks, Jenica, that Alaska is looking at Alaska as a possibility for the next AOA, but they have to do several. So if Hawaii, we do our homework, Hawaii could be one of them, maybe. And that's something that Tori and I just kind of touch base on and talk about. That would be great, because that would really lock in some focus on aquaculture around, you know, the waters around Hawaii. And whether or not this is just toss this in here, Tori and I are working on a project that the alignment of, she's working on a project to build a framework for aquaculture permits in fed waters, which are 3 miles out to 200. And working with the state side to make sure that the pipes are connected and things are aligned, because many of the federal agencies are going to be the same between the two different waters on that imaginary line. That whether or not that will lead to streamlining, I don't know if that's the case, or improvements, but at least we are starting to talk about things on a scale that we want to make sure things can go as smoothly as possible. So that project is out there. Okay, so tactically, this is what we're looking at. I break up my stuff into 3 different areas, which is a little white box on the left. Commercial activity is really where I put all of the existing sort of commercial ventures and fish for food and SPF shrimp into that area, because they don't fit necessarily into the environmental restoration side, which I talked about as a new and emerging strategy to move forward. And tying everybody together are the support services and equipment. And that's kind of a clunky name, but that's really where I see innovative services and things like people like Hatch and Fish 2.0 and a bunch of other new players that are pushing innovation will sit. So they all kind of work together. Nothing is necessarily, there's not hard walls between each of them. I have a Venn diagram, which I won't give to you, but they overlap. So these are the 3 areas that I'm looking at. And how I view things, and this is just my personal thing, on the right side are general aquaculture development elements. So the things for these 3 things on the left, the activities that I focus on are on the right. Applied research, communication, demonstration, technology transfer, and education and training. Because we're constrained with resources, I can't do everything, so I have to prioritize and make the best of what we have. So that's my lens, you guys, and whether you knew that or not, now you guys know. And so here's our current list. So one of the secrets is that before 2022, my budget was $30,000 a year annually. So we begged, borrowed, and stealed most everything we did. But in 2022, the legislature gave us 400 grand, which is not a lot, but it's enough dedicated funding so we could start to move projects forward. So that's why this is as far as we go back. Okay, that 2022 restorative aquaculture, that's the Hawaii Opportunities Report, is something we cobbled some funds together and we threw that together. So, but the dedicated funding we got in 23 and 24 is part of the budget. I will note that 23, it got lopped off in the very beginning, so we only had 300,000 because of COVID and budget restrictions. So we're looking in the 2025 budget, which is what they're discussing now. We're going to get more budget restrictions because of politics on the HINA, et cetera. So the 3 categories are what I mentioned before, were commercial activity, restoration, and the support equipment and services. I actually should change that, but okay. So last year, we did the improvement report, which we talked about. What's still coming out and is finalizing in a couple of months is a restorative aquaculture risk assessment. And the benefit of that will help us with permitting on restorative aquaculture activities out in the ocean. And because there are no permits for this stuff, there's no permits for conservation per se in let's say growing more seaweed for conservation. So I wanted to do a risk assessment as of 2023 and to provide that information for everyone, but also for our regulators to show that there shouldn't be any necessarily undue adverse impacts to the environment if we're doing some of these activities. This thing called indigenous seaweed biocomposite analysis. I took 5 indigenous seaweeds, and I know there's many more, but we took 5 that we could get our hands on, and working with University of Hawaii and the University of Washington to do a bioanalysis, composite analysis on them. So what that is again, this is people like Kai who are excellent at science. I did not go to science class. The different components on a cellular level, like carbohydrates and lipids, et cetera, that make up our seaweeds. Because what that will tell us is if we match it up, if it's possible to, remember that seaweed report that we looked at a few slides ago, those different products have specific criteria for the seaweed that is being used for those products, right? Whether it's for construction or for pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals or whatever, biofuels. What's in our seaweed, we will have now a apples to apples analysis of it. There's 2 things. We'll know more about these 5 seaweeds in Gracilaria, which is Ogo. I'm having a brain fart. I can get you the list of which ones we're looking at, but we also now have a model for other seaweeds to come in, and we can analyze them in a similar manner to come out with a grid. And we will know what's going on in the seaweed so that whether or not our indigenous seaweeds have a chance at those value-added markets, okay? And on the right side, talking about permits, our friend John Corbin, back in 2011, he revised a book called The Permits and Regulatory Requirements for Hawaii Aquaculture. And we gave that to our friends at Sea Grant, and they now have it up on their site. It's a work in progress. We really took the book and tore it apart and put it up there. It wasn't necessarily built for the web, but it's pretty good. It's better than what we had before. And now we can point to it to say that if you are interested in aquaculture, in what kind of permits are you looking at least in the state waters. And going back to that thing I mentioned with Tori Spence on the Fed waters, how do we build a more comprehensive permitting ecosystem kind of view to know that's what's happening if you want to start a new project or you struggle with whatever. These pages that we have links to the regulatory agencies and also what are the criteria needed for specific permits. Okay, so this year, on the left side, my topic here, and I don't want to get it too confusing with making a 3D sort of a view, is applied research. So we're putting funds toward ramping up from a bench scale to a pilot scale black soldier fly biorefinery. Now, everybody who's in the industry knows about black soldier flies and how it's not a new thing, but for Hawaii, we haven't set up one yet. And there are many uses, of course, for black soldier flies. Typically, the best one, of course, is that it eats food waste. So again, to have a positive impact on the environment, because all of our food waste goes to the landfills, or it's supposed to be going toward the swine operations, is creating a value-added product, whether it's fertilizer or feed, and our feed ingredients out of that, I believe is an excellent use of a waste stream that is untapped. So what we're trying to do there is to build a colony of local black soldier flies that we can support black soldier flies commercial operations going forward. In the middle, we are looking at growing seaweed. This is all indigenous seaweeds, macroalgae, using sewage treatment at the sewage treatment plants. And this is an idea that we came up with after looking at what's happening in Australia. And they have commercialized this already. So we have to do our homework here. So we will see what kind of water quality improvement. So actually, horrifyingly, I learned a little bit more about sewage treatment. There's different levels, and the first treatment is that removes solids. And that's all. There's 3 treatments. I guess the second one will look at other nutrients that are in the water. In Hawaii, all we do is the first treatment, and then we shoot it out into the ocean. Now, that's my understanding. If someone has more levels of understanding of that, we can, feel free to chime in. But what we would do is we would put raceways of our indigenous seaweeds at the end of that cycle. And they are doing the research now on how much nutrients how much phosphorus and nitrogen will be pulled in by the seaweed that's growing, how clean the water, the change in water cleanliness or quality before and after, and the robustness of the seaweed. So if we tie that seaweed back into the indigenous seaweed biocomposite analysis, we will have, if it works out, a ATM of seaweed, because we're never running out of sewage, you guys. And in this case, we would have the ability to grow it. And again, we get into the weeds, and our friends that are really into the sciences will say, well, okay, well, how are you going to feed it, et cetera. So all of this is being worked on right now. But at the higher scale, if seaweed can be cultivated at the end, integrated and cultivated in the community sewage treatment, urban sewage treatment process that improves the water quality, and we come out with a ingredient to a value-added product, then we can start to throw those numbers at that 600 million. As a byproduct of this, I don't know if some of you guys went to that Thrive conference. I guess it was earlier this year or late last year. And there was this group there's 2 ladies from Stanford that have a new process to take ag waste and turn it into a bio oil, which is one step before biofuels, from what I understand. So we have them looking at our indigenous seaweeds. So if we connect up this one column into the possibilities of, and it seems as of a couple of weeks ago, they're not saying that it's not working. They're working through the process, but we would grow seaweed in the sewage treatment plant. We are positively impacting the ocean. We don't need to have permits in the ocean. And we would have the ability to make a highly valuable value-added downstream product. So we'll see. We will probably have to come out with some sort of a conference or something after this thing comes, that it kind of goes its course, because we may be onto something fairly large. And Maria Haas is working with us on the right side to take Bob Howerton's 2001 document on best aquaculture practices and update that to a current. And we would throw that up against the Sea Grant website. And so we would have permits and then best aquaculture practices in the modern times up there as a foundational piece for new farmers. Okay, moving forward. I know I'm giving you guys a lot of information here. This is a list that I gave to the Senate Water and Land, so I didn't want to deviate from it because it's sort of been published. First project, and so by no means is this exhaustive, but these are the things that I'm starting to look for different avenues of funding. We have put some into the congressionally delegated funding buckets. We're also looking for grants, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And depending how much money I get out of the government this year, whether or not I can do some stuff myself remains to be seen. Again, the budgets are getting severely cranked by the current constraints that our state government has. Okay. Financing restorative aquaculture projects. We know that all of this stuff is great and nice to talk about, but we need funding. So I believe there's a mix between private sector, public sector, and philanthropic funding, and we need to do a study that see how we can do it. This incorporates a blue carbon credit framework. Again, if you look at even that seaweed grown in the sewage treatment plants, the ecosystem value of that has to be monetized so that we can get credit for it, but also it feeds into could be an offset in a carbon credit framework. So that's a project. Again, let's talk a little bit more about restorative aquaculture feasibility studies. This one, it seems to me, as I think about it back, is that it's more of a connection to that AOA atlas, and by no means is it going to be at that level. But we want to start to look at the identified potential sites for restorative aquaculture using spatial mapping. And this is something that Tori at NOAA and I continue to talk about and how we can work through there. Other ideas out there are commercial aquaculture parks. And as we know in the industry, the guys on this call know that it's not as easy as setting up a park for terrestrial ag. And plumbing and water quality are paramount, also effluent discharge. So not all sites are the same, obviously. So doing a study on that. I also believe there should be an aquaculture innovation center on Oahu. I love Nelha and its site and its all its physical attributes, but it is a challenge to get to for the tactically and logistically sometimes. So can we set up something on Oahu where we have we have Manoa here, we have the politicians here, we have the banks here, we have housing, et cetera, et cetera. So doing a study for that, what would be a good site for it and how much and what we need to do and how much would it cost. This top one was something that I took from every year. Our friends at NELHA work with UHERO on the impact of NELHA, but we've not done on aquaculture for the state. And again, this comes back to raising the level of understanding of aquaculture, because all we have are these really rough, again, $90 million from NAS. That's it. But we know that there's more value. So this study would start to take a look at that. And these other ones coming down the line are more infrastructure projects to take these ideas and get them further along the line for commercialization. So the wastewater treatment thing, $2 million, that would be to develop a demonstration level project on site at a sewage treatment plant. BSF, again, to develop a small scale commercial BSF production and processing facility. Hydroponic greenhouse, we don't have actual baselines on optimum greenhouse production parameters, and that has to do with humidity. There's 12 of them: humidity, heat, airflow, etc. And with the current types of greenhouses and the current materials that we can put on the structure, it really impacts the heat and how much UV goes through. So at least in 3 of our microclimates, we want to do set up baselines and typical greenhouses so that we can help our farmers who are doing hydroponics that say, okay, this is how you have to build your greenhouse. and how you might want to set it up that fits your needs based on some science. And the last one, something that Liz Aquina, my staff, and we dreamed up. And this really looks at maybe a possible future in the integration of aquaculture and terrestrial farming. So on a 10-acre model, and if you're interested, I can talk to you guys more about this, is that at the top, it's a terrace or there's some slope, aquaculture ponds, greenhouse production, another settling pond, and into forestry. So that would, let's say, diversify your 10-acre plot, and that becomes a widget that we can move forward with that makes sense for the both socially, environmentally, and economically, because we did the numbers, etc. So I told the Senate that I needed 11 million point one, and they laughed, and we'll see. But what we want to do is you take this and say, okay, this is the long game, and we keep at it. So again, this is the things I'm looking at and trying to throw my weight at, because I think this is going to move an industry forward, and a lot of people can follow along, whether or not it fits into your own missions and your own organizations is something that you can think about or decide. So
Todd, sorry, Todd, we just have a few minutes left, and I'm wondering if we could entertain a couple of questions right now.
Okay, so sure. So let me just real quick. Here's the links to all of this stuff. I did see in the chat, Eric Franklin said, what's the difference between aquaculture park and innovation center? Aquaculture parks are focused on production, and innovation is more on the R&D and the ideation. I saw that word before, and more like what Hatch is doing and those cohorts that move through their process. Aquaculture parks are similar to agriculture parks, where that would be a farmer set up and you get a certain amount of acres, and you get cheap leases, and you should be producing stuff. Could they be co-located? Possibly. Again, it has to do with the actual physicality of the land and what you're working with.
Yeah, thanks for the good question, Eric. And Todd, I was wondering, how are you determining the priorities of these future projects?
Well, that's a great question. We run it up through our chain here. These are priorities that I guess we think of it in terms of what we can attain. What's the best?
So your chain is staff? Is that what it is?
And department. Yeah. So I guess, is your question about where do stakeholders fit in?
Sure. I mean, that could be a question. How do you get industry input on these priorities?
Well,
because you did say that, you're not so much the science guy, right? So it would be, I think, imperative to engage the science guys on this.
I would have to think about that, right, Jane, because everything matters. And whether we are pushing into new industries, right? And we're trying to find partners that can move us forward. So rather than saying, how do we prioritize what we're doing? I would throw this back to say, in my mind, everybody has limits and missions into what their organization is doing, like even your collective. What are you doing to increase your value so that whether or not you're producing anything, or you're doing research, or you're being a facilitator, that has to be within your roles. And that all adds up into this larger picture of value that can push this industry forward. Because some people are not interested in moving the industry forward necessarily, because that's not their responsibility, right? That's our responsibility. So stakeholder engagement and whether or not our current group of stakeholders includes all the people that we need or the different views that we need to have is also another question. So I would couch that one of our missions is to broaden our stakeholder group to incorporate different pieces that are fitting into more of a business sense of not only the science, because science is important, but really what comes down to this is a business-oriented mission. And who is out there, and whether or not they're even local is also whether or not we engage people on and growing this industry. So this plan that we came up with, we took a global view with Hatch. Part of their mission was to go out and they did survey the industry. So there was industry feedback coming into the strategy. But what we're doing when we're focusing on different projects, it's multifaceted, right? What's the politics? How much resources do we have? What is the interest that we see, not only in the industry, but politically, because we're a political animal, how to move forward. And whether that jives with maybe what the industry wants to see, it sometimes is contentious or it doesn't fit. But the people on the government side are trying to navigate their own waters. So I don't know if that's a great answer.
Well, thank you, Todd. And, just letting you know that industry is always eager and anxious to collaborate with the Department of Ag. But, we're at the end of our time today. Todd, thank you so much. I want to see if there are any burning questions out there. Maybe there's time for one question. Anyone have one?
Jean. Oh, sorry. I put a question in the chat about the black soldier flies. If Todd has, or the state has anybody aligned for operating the BSF food reclamation system?
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure who that is, but no, we haven't set up that yet. We are still at the bench scale level. So as we look at if we ever get funding, we would look at who and what we could partner with. I just want to give a shout out to Senator Glenn McKay. He's always willing to participate with us on the aquaculture topics. He was the one that got us that dedicated funding. And he is involved with our current project with the Clear Aim group. So we really appreciate his efforts. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. And Anthony.
Yeah, real quick. Thanks, Todd. I had a question in my head about like, where does the economic return that we're looking for, and when I say we, the entire industry, including the state, where does that return expect to lie in terms of years out from now? Because a lot of the marks that you presented on included theoretical, currency exchange, carbon credit, blue carbon credit, and that's not materialized yet. And so it looks like a lot of the planning, including tangible projects and tasks that the department is undertaking, is kind of prepping for that point. So when are we expecting things to materialize on the carbon credit side, and what is the goal of the state really to, if we're looking out into the future, to start building value? Because a lot of the industry stakeholders here that are on the producer level we're not scratching our heads necessarily because of the things that you said. It's just there are some elements to it that are totally removed, as you alluded to in the very beginning. And you said we're going to circle back. So at what point are we going to circle back? And at what point is the economy going to follow with the things that you're hoping to get done?
Well, thanks, Anthony. And that's actually a loaded question, because one of the things about plans is they deteriorate as soon as you hit reality, right? And but the reason that we're planning is that these are opportunities that we see going forward, but there's so many things that could go sideways. The presidential election is a crapshoot. So how does that impact our federal guys? Our current situation locally with our government and their focus and having to deal with the Lahaina disaster and how that impacts our state budgets is completely unknown. And the things that the senator struggles with on a political level locally is also, this is all in a swirl. So the reason we brought up introduced those topics is that we see that the globe is moving. We see that carbon credit markets for aquaculture are starting to emerge. So, but you're asking when, and I can't answer that because I don't know, because what we always end up doing is we keep coming back to saying, how can we adjust? So the list of projects that I have that I'm working on, for example, black soldier flies is something that we can do and impact feed costs, right? The sewage treatment plant seaweed, something I know works because they're doing it in Australia. If we can pull that off, that's tangible and that works. I would like to see a loop coming back, and so we don't have to rely so much on our legislature because they are constrained with their own things. This is that study on government funding, philanthropic funding, and public funding that has to come out. So we build a framework that we can get other sources of funding. But there's some caveats, right? How we loop back, I guess that was the term that we're both using, and to push that back into more research and more things that help everybody is something that has to be built. But these are just plans that we have, because right now, if we continue to do what we're doing, nothing seems to be moving, right? And that's everybody's frustration. I get it. So we're trying to look at foundational pieces that can help the most people that we can. I don't have any more definitive answer than that.
Thanks, Todd. Jim, did you have a question or a comment? Oh, you're on mute, sorry. Okay, well, thank you so much, Todd. We really appreciate your presentation today and appreciate your partnership. And thanks to everyone for attending, and we shall see you very soon. Aloha, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.